Today we're welcoming journalist Rosie Taylor to the podcast to talk about how PRs and journalists are working together and should be working together in 2026. Rosie is an award-winning freelance journalist who specialises in health and consumer news and also offers training and consultancy on how to get featured in the press. She's a fantastic follow on LinkedIn where she shares honest and to-the-point tips to PRs based on her experiences as a journalist, especially when it comes to AI. We're really looking forward to talking to her more in depth about all of this. Welcome, Rosie.
Thank you so much for joining us, Rosie. We're going to delve straight in. From your perspective as a freelance journalist, describe to us how the relationship between journalists and PR professionals are at the moment. AI is changing a lot. What kind of changes have you seen? How is the dynamic?
So hi, thanks for having me.
Hello.
So straight in with a mega question there. I think I could probably talk for about an hour on that point alone. But yeah, I would say that the last year, 18 months has seen some of the biggest changes in the media industry, how we're working and how we're working with PRs that I've seen in the whole of my 15-year career. And AI has been a massive driver in that. So one of the issues that I know you've spoken about before on the podcast is the kind of volume of AI slot press releases that we're getting, made up stuff. There's issues with fake press releases, fake journalists, fake PRs, fake experts, and we're having to wade through all of this. So previously, the kind of tension, I guess, between journalists and PRs was that PRs wanted to get journalists' attention and to get us to use your stories. And from a journalist perspective, all we had to do was kind of say, is this story good enough, yes or no? Now there's a whole nother layer that we're dealing with, which is this story even true? Is the person that's come from a real person? So that's just added so much complexity at a time when journalists are kind of more time pressured than ever before. We've seen kind of rounds of redundancies at lots of publishers. There's lots of pressure to produce not just lots of content, but different types of content. So, like we all are having to go on podcasts, as we are right now, that people are writing newsletters, there's stuff for socials, the kind of old transaction that you just provided a story and it either went on print or broadcast. All of those lines have been blurred and everyone's doing a bit of everything now. So, yeah, it's a kind of crazy time, really. We're all doing more than ever before and we're having to do it in an environment where we don't really know whether anything is true.
That's such a great way of summarising it. It's just made your job so much harder at a time when there's already loads of pressure. So how much harder is it making it? When you're getting this AI slop, are you calling it out? Are you just binning it? How are you dealing with that aspect of things?
It's really interesting because I think it depends very much on the type of journalism that you do. And I think for journalists working for publications that have very much more of a kind of clickbait, high volume model, it's really difficult because they're under pressure to generate a lot of content, and a lot of that does come from PRs. And these are the publications, I'm not going to name them now, but we all know who they are, who have been called out for accidentally ending up using fake stuff because there just isn't the time to check. And I think hopefully there's going to be some changes brought in to stop that happening. For me, because I'm a freelance journalist, and we can talk in a bit about how that differs, but I don't really do that kind of stuff. I don't cover breaking news. I don't cover the kind of daily stuff that's sent out widely to large numbers of people because I have to convince an editor to commission me to write a story and they're not going to pay me to write something that's already out there. So I work almost entirely with exclusive stories that get pitched to me, and I do get pitched AI stuff as well. But I guess in a way it's kind of easier for me to tell the difference because I tend to only work with pitches that are really tailored to me anyway. And the AI ones are really that. But I don't know, I have had ones where I've had a tailored intro, but then when I've looked at the press release, I've been like, yeah, this is very ChatGPT. So, and it's really difficult because I think, there's a real temptation to use LLMs and like ChatGPT or whatever to structure or help you put together a press release, because when you put the information into it and say, can you generate a press release, it does come up with something that looks good. Objectively, you're like, oh yeah, that reads quite well. That's probably better than I could have done myself and sent out. But the problem is that when you're a journalist and you're receiving like maybe 100 of these a day, they all look exactly the same. So if you want your pitch to stand out in an inbox where some of my editors get more than 1,000 emails a day, if 100 of them look the same, it's so easy to just say, well, we'll just ignore those 100. And I think that's where there's a real risk with getting too reliant on AI and PR lies, because you want to stand out from the crowd. If you use AI to format your press release or help you write your headline, you really risk looking like all of those other AI-generated press releases, many of which are fake, and we don't have the time to determine what's fake and what's not. So it just automatically goes into the no pile. I mean, that's not the case for everyone, but certainly for me. My inbox, I've realised actually, because I've pressed this as spam on quite a few very AI press releases, it now automatically detects that format. And all of those ones have gone. Yeah. I looked at my junk the other day and I was like, oh, there's loads of press releases in here, because they were all formatted in exactly the same way. So I think there's a real risk that if you look too much like everybody else, your stuff is just not going to get seen even, let alone picked up.
I was just curious. Obviously, you've been in journalism for a long time, so I imagine you recognise certain agency names or people who work in PR. The AI slop that you're getting through, do they tend to be from kind of new agencies that you've never heard of, or people who are very new to you? Or are they names that you recognise, agencies that you recognise, who you're like, oh, I think they've started to use a bit of ChatGPT here?
It's a bit of a mix. I mean, I have been in journalism for a long time, but also the volume of people in PR, especially as a ratio to journalists, is just massive.
Yeah.
So, for example, like there's one guy covering health and science news at The Sun, but every single brand, university, organisation, charity involved in health and science sends their press releases to that one person. So there's just such a massive volume of names. People move all the time. So unless it is a contact that I know really well, I don't always recognise names. There's just so many new names in my inbox every day anyway. But yeah, it's definitely the thing with the really spammy AI ones is they're made up. I can't tell whether they're completely made up people, but they've all got these like really weird names that sound like a little bit too like John Smith or
too perfect.
Yeah, they're just a little bit too perfect. They just don't quite. They are like English names, but not quite right. Like when you get those T-shirts that are written in English but have been written by English in a non-English speaking country, and it's like happy is good or something. You're like,
technically
it does. Yeah, it does make sense, but it's not quite right. And it's the same with a lot of these press releases we get, that the names and the PR agency names just don't quite ring true. But it's really hard to define what it is. I mean, I think there's been some attempts to define how you can tell that a press release has been written with AI, and it's I don't think anyone's been able to put it down to anything other than there's just something a bit creepy and not quite right about it that there is with a lot of that kind of ChatGPT type writing.
Yeah, even the tools that say they can do it, I've put things through that I know aren't written by AI, and it will flag up certain parts of it that say it's suspected AI, and it's like, well, no, because AI obviously is based on how humans write. So there's just no foolproof way of doing it. But yeah, you're right. There is a vibe.
Yeah, exactly.
There
is a vibe, and that is also, like you say, that's really annoying for journalists as well, because I've seen journalists complain on LinkedIn that their copy has been flagged up as potentially AI generated, and they're like, dude, like you trained the AI model on my journalism. That's why
no wonder.
Looks like AI, because you stole all my copy. So yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult
time.
It's a weird time, and it's difficult to know what's going on.
Going back to your inbox,
yes,
and how many pictures you get from PRs, how often are you using what people send to you or PRs send to you in your stories? Like, compare the number of emails you get to actually the ones that do turn into a story. What's that kind of ratio like?
So I love a bit of data. So I did actually go and have a look at my inbox and have a think about this. I mean, I've done a bit of an inbox audit before, and sometimes it's as much as kind of like 95% of what I get is not relevant. Or it's not that it's irrelevant because it is in my subject areas, but it's not something I'm going to cover. As like I said before, I'm a freelance journalist. I deal mainly in exclusives. I don't cover breaking news. So it's helpful for me to get releases showing, oh, this is breaking, this has been sent out to everyone today. But I'm not going to write about it. So there's a kind of bit of a tension there, and that, like, I don't mind getting those releases. I do mind getting followed up to ask why I'm not writing about it. But I actually had a little look back through the stories that I've written this in the past year, and again, because I'm a bit of a data nerd, sort of did a sort of bit of a crunching as to where those stories originally came from. And actually, I was surprised to find about kind of 45% of them were pitched to me, whereas the rest were either kind of ideas from my ideas or my editor's ideas, or had come from like me covering an event. there is quite a lot of potential, I think, for PRs to pitch ideas. But what I would kind of caveat that with saying that they're definitely not all PR pitches. A lot of the stories I work on come from either members of the public coming to me with their own personal experience or campaigners saying, we've come across this, we've got a story. So they are PRing themselves in a way, but it's not in a formal way. So I'd say probably PR pitches make up the minority of that. But I do use them. What happens more rarely is that someone will pitch me something and that is what the finished article is. Like often it's just a small part of a bigger idea. So I did a feature this year, for example, where someone had pitched me a case study of someone that lived in a really remote part of the country and how they had to use an online service to get healthcare. And I pitched this as a case study to an editor and they came back and said, why don't you broaden this to look at get access to healthcare in rural areas more generally? And then I wrote a feature that was about healthcare deserts in the countryside. That original PR pitch made a couple of hundred words within a 2,000-word feature. I guess it depends on what your end goal is. Like if your end goal was for your brand to be like the headline on the story, then that's not happened. But if your goal was to get mentioned in a respective publication, then it works. So yeah, I mean, I always see value in PR pitches as long as they are obviously relevant to what I'm actually writing about.
Well, let's talk about that relevance, because disregarding AI, let's disregard AI for a second, but what kind of things do you not want to see in PR pitches? What makes a PR pitch kind of immediately irrelevant to you? Is it something that's a bit cliche or overly promotional? Like, you can flip it the other way. Like, what do you want to see in a PR pitch?
For me, it's always that it's tailored. So this is what I want to see. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm not on a particular publication. So I get a lot of pitches that say, we think your readers would be interested in this. And I'm always really tempted to reply back saying, which readers? Because I write for multiple different publications and it's kind of clear that they haven't thought about that. And I guess also know who I am, not in terms of like, don't you know who I am? But in terms of like, do you know who you're pitching to? Do you know that if you give this to me, I could potentially put it into 5 different publications? Or, you know, do you know that I write for publications that you might not be targeting and I might decide to send it there? You know, you need to know who you're pitching to and what the kind of thing is that they do. So for me, it's always just anything that shows that someone is aware of who I am, what I do, who I write for, and then provides a story that is something that readers would be interested in. And I think that's probably, even when I do get tailored pitches, that's the biggest place people fall down, is that it's, especially because I write a lot about healthcare, it's very easy to get caught up in pitching something that says about this new technology, it's going to save hospitals money or it's going to make doctors' lives easier. And that never quite works for a mainstream audience. So you've always got to take it that extra step and be like, but why would patients care? It's going to save hospitals money and therefore waiting lists are going to go down and you're going to get your hip replacement sooner. You know, this is what people care about. So the releases that and the pitches that work best are the ones that have taken it that extra step and thought, why would my readers care about this?
Yeah. Ironically as well, coming back to AI, it should be easier than ever before to find out using AI to find out what you're writing, like what you cover, why you cover it. Because ahead of this podcast, like I obviously used a little bit of AI a little bit of ChatGPT to go, okay, tell me about Rosie Taylor. You know, it gives some good info. A little bit of stalking, yeah, exactly. But that baffles me, is because it's like everything for speed and ease rather than actually focusing on the detail. Because it should be way more detailed and like, no, this is exactly what I'm pitching for, who I'm pitching to, and make it clearer for you. But obviously that's not borne out in reality all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly one of the things I always recommend is a good way of using AI in PR and journalism, is to really research the publications and journalists that you're targeting. And because you can really interrogate it. And, you know, I've done a test on myself to see if it works. I've put in some links to my byline pages and like socials and be like, tell me what kind of things this journalist writes, and then put a pitch in. Would this journalist likely to cover this story? And the slight downside is that obviously things like ChatGPT are like super flattering. So there was like, oh yes, you've got such an excellent idea. I'm sure the journalist would love it. And you have to be like, no, seriously. And they're like, oh no, probably not. But it's really helpful, especially, you know, because media databases can be very broad. So I get put into a category called health, which includes so many different things, and includes wellness and fitness. And I don't write about any of those things unless there's a very kind of sciencey or like consumer protection angle to it. So I get constant press releases about supplements and stuff, which I don't cover. But actually, when I did a test on myself and put it into ChatGPT and I was like, I've got a story about supplements, would Rosie Taylor be likely to cover this? It actually said, not really, probably not unless there was a public health risk angle. And I was like, oh, that's actually really good, because there's a lot of people that, and it is really difficult to keep on track of what journalists do, partly because we change jobs a lot, and we also change beats a lot within our jobs. What I do has evolved over the past 15 years, and I don't expect anyone to know the ins and outs of it. But because AI can look at such big volumes of data so quickly and see trends, it's really good at doing stuff at like establishing not just, oh, does this journalist cover health, but like what kinds of health stories do they cover, and would they, are they likely to pick up my pitch or not?
Yeah.
The Digital PR podcast is brought to you by Coverage Book, the tool that is helping thousands of PR teams around the world spend less time and effort on reporting so they can put their energy back into the more important parts of PR. Many people come for the metrics, but then they stay for our estimated coverage views figures. That's right, we predict how many people may see your article or social post. We don't just tell you the total amount of people that happen to go to a publisher site or an influencer's feed. We really are about helping PR professionals be taken seriously at the important time of measuring success. So why don't you give it a try? Test the metrics and see how much time your team can save. Go to coveragebook.com for your free trial.
It takes me slightly onto the next question, which is around building a relationship with a journalist. Because obviously, if you have an actual one-to-one relationship with a journalist, you are going to know if they've moved jobs or what they cover. You're just going to have that like depth of information. But how realistic is that now? Because as you said, there are less journalists around. There's lots of PRs. So I imagine if a PR wanted to foster a relationship with a journalist, they're one of many. Journalists probably don't have time to be going out for the classic boozy lunches of the 90s that everyone talked about apparently happened. What's your kind of thoughts on that? Is it still important to have a relationship with a journalist? Is that going to change if your story is picked up? And if so, how can you foster that relationship?
I mean, that's a great question, because I am sad about the demise of the boozy lunch.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. I mean, there was a time when I did go for some nice long lunches and it was great. But yeah, few and far between these days. But mainly because we just literally don't have time to be away from our desks. I mean, I think the relationship question is so important, because in this world where we're not sure what's real and what's not, knowing that you have a real human relationship with someone is so important. But equally, there's this paradox that getting hold of journalists, I do appreciate, is extremely difficult. There's a few things that I'd recommend in terms of relationship building. One is obviously, fairly straightforward. You can engage with their content, if they're on socials, comment, obviously not in a kind of creepy sycophantic way, but like if you're genuinely interested, that shines through. And then, when you're pitching, even just to say, oh, I saw you posted about this recently, so I thought you might be interested in this. It's just that little bit of extra human connection to show that you have a recognition of who they are and what they do. So that's kind of one way to start building a relationship. Another thing that I always suggest is meet us where we are. So it is hard to get us away from our desks on a kind of speculative basis, or let's have a chat and see what stories we can come up with. But if we're going to be covering an industry conference, for example, or attending a big event, then come along and meet us, or email, say, are you going to this big industry conference? Could I grab you for 5 minutes for a coffee? And I never mind kind of sparing the time to say hi to people when I'm already working. It's taking time out of work that's so difficult. And similarly, with a lot of journalists now, we do offer consultancy. It's something I do. I come into people's offices, I do Q&A. So essentially you're paying for our time, but you then get us for an hour, you can ask us anything you want, and then you've had that kind of in-depth conversation and we don't forget it. And I always say to people, if I have met you in person, email me and make that really overwhelmingly obvious at the start of the email. I saw you the other week at the Q&A, because it is really difficult for me to keep track of everyone's names. But, if I've ever met someone in person, I always try and at least reply to their email, even if I can't use the pitch. The final thing is, I think that the kind of old model that you had to meet a journalist and schmooze them first before you could get a story in, I do think that's turned on its head, especially since kind of COVID and everyone's been working remotely, and the kind of way the media industry has changed in the last few years. So actually, in a lot of cases now, what will happen is someone will offer me a really good exclusive and they'll work with me to build that up into a story that works for a publication. And then off the back of that, we will then potentially meet for coffee next time I'm near their offices, and we'll talk about other stories we could do together. So actually, it's almost like reverse. It kind of starts with having the really great pitch.
Yeah.
That's your kind of entry point. And then from there on, you might be able to build a more ongoing relationship. So I think getting the perfect pitch really is still your best way in.
Get the right pitch, the right story. Yeah, that makes sense rather than like, hey, come and have a drink and then you'll cover my story. That never seemed to work for me anyway. But I missed out on the boozy lunches as well. Sad. I'm going to drag you back to AI because you mentioned you use ChatGPT on yourself. How do you use AI in your day-to-day workflow? Can you give some other examples of the kind of things you're doing, how you're using it, why it's beneficial?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I have to admit, for a long time, I was a very kind of like anti-AI person. Like the whole premise that it was basically stealing writers' copyright to feed the beast was something that I was kind of strongly against on an ethical basis. But I think with all these things, you just have to accept it's happening, like social media, all of these things. It's happening and we have to engage with it. So I've been trying to use it in constructive ways. I never use it for writing, largely because I just don't think it's good enough. And I really think that kind of the future of journalism depends on people wanting and valuing content that is authentic and human and not something that anyone could just feed into ChatGPT and generate. So I very much avoid using it for writing. But I have used it for research. It's quite good. Like we just said about, in terms of finding exactly what journalists do, it's exactly the same with kind of lots of research topics. If I'm struggling to find stuff that I know has been published, but that public bodies are making quite difficult to find, they do this thing where they're trying to be transparent. So they put everything on their website, but not in a way that you can ever find it.
Yeah.
It's quite good at pulling out links and digging into things. I use it to make really time-consuming boring tasks easier. So if you've got something in a spreadsheet and you need to convert into bullet points in a Word document, for some reason, Word formatting goes wild, it takes you ages to sort out, whereas in ChatGPT, you can just be like, can you just convert this? Stuff like that. I once had a story where I had like 40 different currencies to convert into pounds, which would take me about an hour to do manually. And I just said, can you just do all of this into pounds at today's rate? And it did it straight away and checked a few and it was right. And I was like, oh, great. That just saved me an hour of my time. So yeah, all little things like that at the moment. I am yet to find, I know there are people that have like all sorts of amazing, clever uses for it. I'm yet to find anything major that's been kind of game changing in the way that I work, but I'm certainly trying not to avoid it as much as I did before.
It's a nice way of putting it. I've started to argue with it, which is worrying. I don't think I've spoken to you about this, Lou, but genuinely, like when I know it's wrong or it's not giving me the answer I want, it's like, why is this difficult for you? It's like, why am I being rude to ChatGPT? But it's maybe like venting stuff that I wouldn't say to a human.
It's so frustrating. It's like when you get those customer service chatbots and they're just like, like it just makes you so angry so quickly because they just don't get it. And I just find the same. Like, ChatGPT is really, I know that other LLMs are available, but I use ChatGPT mainly. And it's really, really, really bad at word counts. And you think this is a really basic robotic thing. So, I've done a thing before where I've had to cut something right down and I wanted some inspiration to help me do it. And I was like, can you cut this to 50 words? And it's made it like 75 words or 40 words. I'm like, why can you not count? Like, this seems a really basic computer thing. But yeah, it can't count words.
And then you query it and it argues back. Yeah. It argues back. It's like, or it apologises and then does exactly the same thing.
I'll do it again,
It's like dealing with a small child.
Microsoft Word has been counting words for like 20 years. Why can't
leave
you
out of their book?
Good old Microsoft Word.
I know.
Clippy. Do you remember the little paper clip?
That's the real AI.
The original.
Bring it back. Bring it back.
You mentioned around how you don't use it for writing. Are there any other elements of journalism where you're like, AI just shouldn't be used in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it goes back to we as an industry need to be seen as the place where you can get authentic information. And there have been lots of examples recently that have been called out where it slipped through that even really very respectable publications have used fake case studies, fake stories, because they've been fed them. On one side, AI is this powerful tool that's helping lots of people, but for journalists, largely, it's just created this massive headache where we now have to just check and double check that everything is real. And from a PR perspective, it's changed things as well, because the way that experts are verified now is different, and there's a real push from journalists to make sure that experts will speak to us in person on the phone or video. And I know that a lot of experts and spokespeople aren't very comfortable with doing that. So there's a lot of things shifting because of AI. But yeah, I think the real red flag for me in journalism is ever basically taking what an LLM says at face value. You just always have to interrogate it. Because I do it all the time. I might search, or can you find information about this thing? And it'll pull out a couple of facts. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that one. And I always ask it for links and sources. Where did you get this from? And I look, and a lot of the time you're like, oh no, was talking about something else on the page, or they've completely misinterpreted that. So yeah, just always double checking. I think it can be helpful, but you can't trust it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think some people have been lulled into a bit of a false sense of security because it has got a lot better. You know, at the beginning it was making up all sorts of stuff and you're like, this is a joke. And then it gets to a point where you're like, oh, actually this seems pretty legit, but you're so right. There's like certain things where when you just dig a little bit deeper, you're like, oh, you've completely got the wrong end of the stick with this one, ChatGPT.
I find it myself, I'll Google something quickly that I just need to know a fact for, not necessarily for journalism, but for life. Like, oh, can I drink alcohol while I'm taking this medication? And I'll be like, oh yes, it's fine. And then it's really easy to be lulled into that sense of security by this very confident message that you get, this little AI summary that you get at the top, thinking, well, it says it's fine. And I have to remind myself every time, double check it, click through on the source. And sometimes you click through and it's like, the advice used to be it was fine, but now that's been reversed. And you're like, oh,
or it's someone on Reddit just saying that. And it's like, exactly. Fine, that's what you think as a random person. It's fair enough. And are there things for PRs where, again, you feel like you've mentioned how it's not good enough to write press releases, for example, because you can always tell. How would you feel about the idea of PRs using it to come up with their ideas and things like that? Are there other areas of PR where you're like, I really don't love the idea of AI being used in that way?
It can be useful for lateral thinking, but equally it does come up with the same stuff that everyone that asks. So I think there is a risk that we're all coming up with the same thing. I mean, I think what can be helpful, I suppose, if you have something unique, like a load of data from a brand, to ask it to come up with ideas for different ways you could use the data, or, I think it can help you expand your thinking or give you an idea for thinking, well, I definitely won't do that, but I could do the opposite, or that kind of thing. But I think if you're just like, right, I need to write something about health, give me 5 ideas about women's health, I think you're just going to risk ending up with some very generic things that everybody else is pitching. Whereas if you have if you have a case study, for example, you're like, can you suggest 3 different ways they could present this case study in a story? It might come up with one thing that you haven't thought of before that can be really useful. And I don't think there's any problem with that. I mean, similarly, I think in some ways, as much as we're skeptical of AI, there are circumstances where we're quite impressed by it. So, we get a lot of research papers in the kind of health and science field where it'll be like, researchers took millions of data, millions of pieces of data and used AI to analyze it and found these things that we never knew before. And, in those circumstances, people tend to say, ooh, great, amazing. But it's a case of making sure that everything around that is very kind of authentic and reputable. So, with those cases, it's being done by a proper academic institution, and it's being double checked and cross-referenced, and they've looked into the ethics of it and all of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think there's lots of potential for PRs to do the same. You could take existing data sets, loads of like ONS data or government data, NHS data, and analyze it using AI and go to journalists and say, we've done this analysis, we used AI, we've double checked it, and it's come up with these things. Then potentially you've got some great story ideas there. And that's all fine. I think what's important is just being honest about it.
Well, you've led on nicely to the next question, which is, in your view, should PRs kind of disclose when they've used AI? So like we do to our clients and internally, where, we may have used it for some initial research, but for PRs pitching to journalists, working with journalists, should it be absolutely transparent? Like, we used AI for this. Would it put you off? Like, what's your boundary?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I do think we've got very heads up on this idea, like, have you used AI? When actually, like, spell check is AI. Like, we've all been using some kind of AI to a certain degree for a long time without just labeling it that. So I use like AI transcription software, and it saves me loads of time, and it's great. But I wouldn't disclose that as using AI in my work, because I think people read that as being, we've written this using AI. So I would, as a general rule, not say, unless it's something like where the use of AI adds value to the story. So for example, we had this massive data set and we used AI to find this specific information that would have been impossible or would have taken 8 weeks if we hadn't done it. And then it kind of demonstrates that you're using AI to add authenticity to it and sort of value rather than take it away. But I think, if you used AI to brainstorm some ideas at the beginning, don't tell the journalist. I don't think it's going to help you. I mean, it's very like great and honest and moral of you, but I think, realistically, it's only a kind of new incarnation of Googling. But, we used to Google some ideas, what's already out there, what people have already said. And it's just the same thing in a different format. So I don't think you need to declare that personally.
That's a nice way of putting it. And your kind of scientific or academic research paper example where AI is like really enhanced that or done something that would have been nigh on impossible or really difficult to do makes sense. But yeah, I was kind of, I guess, hoping you would say that, because it would seem absurd to be like, we used AI here to edit the copy. We used AI to do the original ideas, etc. It just seems, that's fine as long as there's that human element and you're checking it in advance against the journalist.
I think the only point at which we, ultimately that's the kind of behind the scenes that's come to creating the story. As long as you haven't used AI to generate, as in make up, any elements of the story or, write the whole thing, then you don't need to declare it. And if you have done that, you're obviously trying to be deceptive anyway, so you wouldn't declare it anyway. So I don't think we need to move into a world where we're like, I used spell check on this word because I got it wrong. And then I used AI to help me place this word in the headline.
Be too much.
Going too far.
You spoke about the more like nefarious side of things where people are just using AI to make up everything. That's something that's been like widely covered by Press Gazette particularly and other places. But we had Rob Moore on the podcast a few episodes ago, just when these kind of stories were starting to break, which was really fascinating. On LinkedIn, you do weigh in on this, and I think you've provided comment for Press Gazette articles on this subject. So we'd love to just pick your brains about this whole thing of PRs. I don't know, it feels weird calling them PRs because they're not good PRs, so I don't really like calling them PRs. People using AI to come up with fake experts, particularly to get a brand mentioned and linked to maybe in the press. What are your thoughts on it? I can imagine I know what they are. And it would be really interesting to know kind of how these findings and the fact that this is happening, how it's kind of gone down on your side of the industry, because we know from a PR's perspective, but it'd be interesting to know like how journalists are talking about it with each other. Were they surprised? Things like that. Yeah,
so I heard your interview with Rob Moore. He's great. I mean, he shoots from the hip, doesn't he? He's brilliant. And he's done such a fantastic job of exposing this practice. And I think, to be honest, it's really shocking. Journalists, especially in written media, I think we can be a bit guilty of kind of not being as up to date with technology as we should be. And, I like to think I'm not a dinosaur. I'm still in my 30s, just about. But, there are lots of people in the industry who are older and more experienced. And we tend to just there tends to be an attitude of, I guess, trying to ignore technology for as long as possible until we absolutely have to engage with it. I mean, I worked with an editor not that long ago who refused to have a computer in their office. So these are interesting. These are the kind of attitudes you're up against. And so when stuff like this happens, I guess we were taken by surprise. And, all of these stories came out about really quite reputable publications running completely made up stories about made up people. It's hugely embarrassing for the industry because it also exposes that proper checks aren't taking place, that often quite young journalists are pressured into just churning stuff out and they haven't necessarily had the training and experience to recognise when something isn't right. And for me personally, I mean, my first reaction when I read about these fake experts was like, oh God, I hope I haven't accidentally used one. And doing a quick search of my own cuts and thinking, okay, I think I'm all right. But just, it really puts you on guard. I mean, my first experience of it, and the one that I shared with Press Gazette, was that I put a call out for stories, and I got 3 almost identical responses from 3 experts, in inverted commas, from different places around the world in completely different time zones within 15 minutes of me putting out the call. And I was like, this is weird. And I got back to the PR and realised that the PR, again in inverted commas, had like a Proton Mail email address, which is like a kind of encrypted, dodgy email provider, and didn't have a full name and didn't have actually agency name. It's just, the more I looked into it, I was like, this is so weird. And these comments were from these guys, and they just had like a LinkedIn page, and they were from all these like really random industries. But the thing that really gave it away was that I was asking for people's experiences of using a supermarket loyalty card. And all these guys from like Australia and Malta and New Zealand and Taiwan were like, oh yeah, I go to Tesco all the time. And I was like, do you though? And I actually got back to the PR and was like, what's going on here? Because these guys are all in different time zones. How have they replied like within 10 minutes when it's like 3 o'clock in the morning? And why have they been in Tesco's recently? And they were like, oh no, they're all legitimate. Yes, no, like we've got a bank of statements and we do update them on different things. But they're, you know, one of them was in England recently and had gone to Tesco's. I was just like, none of this rings true. So from then on, I've just been really cautious. And I do still call out for experts. I write about such a wide range of different topics that I don't have a kind of bank. Well, I do have a bank of contacts that I go to on lots of stories, but I often have to write about new things that I've not written about before. So I do need to constantly be finding new experts. But I'm very, very cautious now. I'll only take email comments from like an established press office, like kind of in-house at a major organisation. And even then, sometimes I'm like, dude, this is very obviously being written with ChatGPT. Can you go back and speak to them? And you just have to be so much more careful. And it's difficult because you want to just trust people. But I find myself, you know, I'm about to file copy and I suddenly think, oh God, I should check that this case study is a real person. And I've spoken to them on the phone. But let me just quickly do some searches and check, like, do they have a social media presence? Do they have, you know, are they on their like work blog, pictured at a charity event? Have they got a fundraising page for a marathon they run 3 years ago? Anything that just shows like, oh yeah, no, they are real. They are who they say they are. You know, we've always had to do these checks, but just not, I guess there was no need to do it as thoroughly before. Like previously, if you spoke to someone and they gave you their name and it seemed to be legitimate, that was enough. Whereas now it just isn't. So yeah, it's a whole kind of new layer of checking that has to go on.
I can't get over that Tesco example. That's been just like, it's so audacious. Clearly such an audacious lie.
It really kind of starts to highlight, like I remember when I first started in PR, I was like, I didn't even understand the fact that when a brand turns up in a newspaper, that's been often placed, you know, like a PR has been there to help provide the survey stats or whatever. Like, yeah. I hadn't.
There's a whole behind the scenes mechanism go on.
Yeah, I had no clue whatsoever. I think I just assumed that a journalist would go to Tesco's and be like, oh, can you tell me about your law? You know, like it would have started from that point. And I remembered, like, before AI even existed, thinking, you could just email a journalist and say you work for Estee Lauder and you've got this story about this. And there was this element of kind of trust to a point. Obviously, it helps if you come from a reputable agency that they recognise or they even recognise your name. There were levels of, you know, they wouldn't just take any old thing.
And we used to do so much more over the phone and in person.
Yeah.
So there's been such a shift to doing everything on email.
Yeah.
So that has changed things as well and made it easier for people to kind of slip in.
And it's such a shame that as soon as something becomes easier, people see a opportunity to do dodgy things.
I mean, what's really blown my mind is that there are also fake freelance journalists who have been pitching completely made up stories and getting them in to proper publications. And they've, you know, eventually been caught out and exposed, but I bet some of them haven't. I bet that's still going. And the thing that blows my mind is like, freelance journalism is not a lucrative industry. Like, this is not, like, of all the places to start scamming, like, don't take the few commissions we have away from us. But yeah, I mean, I guess there was a journalist, an editor who got pitched this weird story and then ended up following it back and turning it into a story himself, where he traced it all the way back to this guy using a fake name based in Kenya who was working for like a kind of content creation thing, and he was just basically like, well, if I can get paid $200 for a story, that's good money for me.
Yeah.
And So you think, okay, well, fair enough, but there are easier ways to make $200 than to be a freelance journalist.
So many systems to game.
Yeah, I know. You just think, God, yeah, we really resorted to this.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground, Rosie. So our final question is, well, is it a therapeutic question? It's a cathartic question, maybe. Is there anything else you want to tell PR professionals? Anything at all that kind of vexes you, that you want to celebrate, that you just want them to know? You've given lots of great insights and advice, but yeah, anything else that we've missed?
I mean, I think the most important thing that I guess trend is maybe not the right word, but I think what everyone should really be focusing on over the next year is like being as human as possible. And that's kind of in all aspects. So the way you interact with journalists, just, yes, okay, you might have to write your press release, but writing a kind of personalized, chatty, friendly, just normal human email, introducing yourself, being helpful, cooperative, proactive, all of those things that kind of help all professional human interactions. We get very het up on this like, PR journalist thing, when actually it's just professionals working with other professionals, and you just do it in a way that you'd want to get the attention of anyone in your office. If you wanted to grab your boss for a quick chat, you'd say it in a way that was kind of friendly but professional. And oh, by the way, I've got something really important to tell you. And it's exactly the same with the way that you should approach journalists as a PR, and also with the kind of stories that being pitched. What I'm seeing from editors is there's so much interest in human-facing stories. So whereas previously I might have written something that was like, I don't know, I might have been asked to write 5 signs you've got this condition. Now it's very much like, I wish I'd known that this was a sign of this condition. I was diagnosed 5 years late. It's the same feature, but the focus is very much through a kind of case study lens. So I think there's a real push towards putting humans, real people, real experiences first and foremost in lots of types of journalism, not just the kind of real life magazine tabloidy stuff. Like actually a lot of broadsheet publications are using those first person perspectives now. So I think in all aspects of pitching, making your story appeal to real readers, using real people and pitching it in a friendly human way is going to be your best chance of cutting through this kind of mountains of AI nonsense that we're getting every day.
Thank you, Rosie. What a mad time to be alive, that ultimately we're saying just be more human.
I know.
That's where we've got to as a society.
Literally in 2026, being human is your USP. It's insane. But
unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. But yet somehow it's like, wow, being human's quite good actually. We should be more human.
I spoke to a human being and they gave me like real information.
Well, it's even just like doing this, isn't it? Like, we're in person talking to each other. How nice. Like, we never normally do that, just through a screen. So yeah, being human, I think, is that's the 2026 trend.
Nice.
I called it here first.
It's a perfect end to a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. So how should people get in touch if they want to get in touch with you? Obviously not pitching fake case studies, etc., but is following you on LinkedIn where you're very active? Is that the best way?
Yes, I just realised I've done a terrible job of promoting myself, which is why I need a PR. So I run a weekly newsletter with advice on how to pitch the national press. It's called Get Featured, and you can find it on Substack. But if you Google Rosie Taylor Get Featured, it will just come up. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, Rosie Taylor.
Would definitely recommend Get Featured. We both read it and it's excellent. So thank you for helping PRs to be better and for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to chat to you. Thank you, Rosie.